Welcome everyone to today's UX Design Office Hour session. Today we've got an exciting special guest, Angela Craven, who is one of our UX design mentors, is joining today, and Emily will be interviewing her. So I'm excited to learn a lot about Angela's UX journey and advice that she has for up-and-coming UX designers. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and then she'll get Angela to introduce herself, and the questions will begin. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. This is awesome. I'm really excited to do this together, Angela. I think we could start by having you tell us all about your background and how you got into UX, what you studied, and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. Sounds good. Wow. Where do I begin? Let's see. I have about 11 years of experience, and I'm one of those people who sort of fell into UX. Right now I work as an independent consultant, and I'm also an abstract painter. And I decided to do that so I could balance both. I'm in my studio right now, so see, it's crazy in here. Organized chaos, but chaos. I've always focused on kind of understanding the balance between business and design. And I got into that because I moved to New York after college to become a working artist. And I realized that a lot of my friends who did that same thing didn't really understand business or how business played a part in their creativity. And I think a lot of them struggled as a result of that. So I decided to kind of explore what it would be like to learn more about business. And I ended up working for an arts PR company and learning this, just the business side of creativity and what that looked like. I also got to know the digital department at that PR company. And they were just starting a UX practice there. They're just starting their UX group. And I realized I kind of found my people, because there was this balance between, being creative and being free, but also having some structure and having some business knowledge to pull from. So that just kind of sucked me in, and I've been focused on UX ever since. And now I focus primarily on research and strategy.
Cool. How long ago was that when the PR firm was starting to put together their UX branch?
Oh boy, that was, I want to say about eight years ago, maybe 9 years ago.
Cool.
Yeah.
How has that changed? Or I feel like that was pretty early in the formalized in UX industry, I guess.
Yeah, it actually wasn't called UX at the time. It was called information architecture.
Cool.
We were the IA group, and it was very, it was PR and advertising marketing focused. So there was a lot of content design and interaction design as part of that, but user research wasn't yet even part of the mix. It was very design focused and information architecture focused.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like UX as an industry is always like on a course of self-discovery. Like, yes. What do we call ourselves? Who are we?
Oh,
where do we stop, and where do other designers start?
Oh, for sure. I feel like the whole time I've been in it, it's been a sort of identity crisis. I don't know if there's another way to explain it, but I feel like UX is in a constant mode of identity crisis for good.
Totally.
Too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of an advantage of UX too. It's always evolving, and you can always kind of find your niche within it.
Yeah. So what do you think, if you could think back on that time, like years ago, is there anything that you wish you had known when you entered that group, the IA group?
Thinking about that, I feel like I guess I assumed that there was a process or a structure to follow, excuse me, for each project, and that once I knew that structure, I could kind of apply it to every client, every situation. And I just felt like I could never pin that structure down because you can't. So I wish I had known. I mean, there are some foundational things certainly that you need to learn and that you use as your, structure, so to speak, for each project. But the element of flexibility that I learned by default, I wish I would have known is just, a part of the industry and a part of the process to kind of embrace, instead of looking so much for a set process to follow each time.
I hear that.
Yeah.
Like we try to learn, we have a structure and a process to apply when and if we can, but it's like you have to pick and choose what fits the client best and your timeline, and how can you fit it all into the constraints that you're presented when it comes to the actual project.
Yes, absolutely. And I've always worked in agencies, but I've heard the same thing from people who work for products or for an internal team, that your clients are your business stakeholders and they will have different needs, and the business will have different needs each time. So
totally. Yeah, that's the side that I'm on. I'm in-house. And so that's, we have our own constraints to operate within.
Yeah.
So what did you find? I guess this is pretty related, but do you think that was the most difficult thing in transitioning into UX? Or if you could think about what was really difficult about making that transition, I don't know, what comes to mind?
I really do think it's related to that, kind of waiting for this structure, to understand the whole structure and to be able to start applying that. I feel like the more I looked for that and the more I expected projects to look similarly, the harder it got. And I probably was 5 years into my career before I fully embraced that, change is a constant, not just in the industry and the project, but in the tools that are, that are coming out, and the way you apply the tools. I think, once I started embracing that, things got a lot easier for me. And I started to really kind of hit my groove with it and really enjoy it. I found research through that. So I think that's probably, it's all tied.
Totally. What do you think are some common mistakes that people make when they choose to go into UX?
I feel like probably a big mistake could be, and I don't even know if it's a mistake, but it could be considered part of the learning curve. But I feel like a lot of people feel the pressure to be a generalist and do all the things. And you see tons of job descriptions that require that, and a lot of people trying to hire for that. But I think that once you kind of have a foundational understanding of UX and all the things that you can do with it, it really helps to start honing in on how to apply your strengths to some of the key, or not even key things, but learning how to apply your strengths to certain facets of UX where you can contribute the most, can be kind of an easier entry into the field, I think. There can be lots of pressure to be a generalist, and there probably will continue to be throughout your career. But, even if you are wearing lots of hats, I think there are ways that you can elevate your strengths and really focus on that when it comes to the type of work you're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there isn't enough emphasis on specializing, and that it's okay to specialize, whether that is in an industry or on a particular skill or practice within UX.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So do you have to interview other designers, or have you interviewed designers in the past, like people that you're going to potentially work with?
Yep.
What kinds of things do you look for when you're interviewing designers?
Well, right now it looks totally different than it did when I was working with an agency. So and I mean, it looks totally different, totally the same, I guess I should say. So I think the biggest thing that crosses both when I was looking on the agency side and now as a consultant is the ability to embrace change and to go with the flow to an extent, but be able to also communicate ideas and thoughts and have an opinion on things and be able to back up your opinion. I think those are really important skills. Another thing that I think applies to both that I always look for is just kind of a thirst for learning. The industry changes so much. Everything about it is, it's technology, right? It's constantly evolving. So being able to kind of research things on your own and have an excitement for that, I think is really important. When it comes to working on a project right now as a consultant, I want to look for people who are also independent and can kind of drive their own work as part of the process, because I'm driving my own work too, and there's not an agency structure to rely on. So that is probably one thing that's different than the agency world, where it was more adaptability and different tools that they could use easily or had mastered in some sense, depending on what was required in the role. So as a researcher, have they, what are the types of tools that they've learned and why did they use them? What are the methodologies that they use? Or as an interaction designer, do they like to build prototypes? How do they build those prototypes? So I don't know if that completely explains the differences, but there are a couple of differences.
Yeah, totally. And I guess related to that, are there anything, like what red flags have you seen before when interviewing designers? Because I think that those are all awesome. Like, I love the things to look for, but is there anything that you've ever been like,
someone who can't explain their process, I think, can be a red flag. There are a lot of online portfolios and things to pull from when you're going through an interview. So I think some people kind of copy that as a formula and think, I have to show these pieces, but they can't really explain how they tie together what their process was because they're trying to attach somebody else's process to their work. I think that's a big red flag. Someone who doesn't have strong opinions about their process or how to work through a problem, which is funny because I think at the same time there needs to be a flexibility in that. But if you're not clear on how you feel about design and can have the ability to really advocate for a design decision through user feedback or your findings, then how can you successfully design something? So that I think that can be a red flag if somebody isn't willing to advocate for a thought or an opinion or specifically for a user decisions.
Yeah. And I think that there are ways to show flexibility and being able to work well with other people without compromising your design standards or and that's a challenging thing to demonstrate.
Yes.
Like being able to take input and feedback and criticism, but also firmly stating how you made your decisions is a thing that takes a lot of practice, I think. But I think that's a really great insight into how designers need to be able to present themselves in an interview, for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. And the more stories you can tell about how you've solved a problem with a client in the moment or how you've solved a design problem when those challenges have come up, I think can say a lot about how you would handle, how you would advocate for certain things. So
yeah. I love anecdotes. Like if you can
Definitely.
tell a story about how you did something or answer an interview question with a story from your own work, that is, I don't know, that's always better than trying to like hypothetically guess at how you would do something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we had a question from Anna. So this is jumping to your experience and your work, which I'd love to hear more about. But have you ever been in a situation where the research that you've done and that you're conducting tells you that the product isn't serving the customer in some way? Or has your research findings ever been at odds with the overall business goals or what the stakeholders' expectations are?
Every single time. Every project I worked on has run into that. And, at the beginning of doing research, I thought of that as almost a failure as a designer, because I felt like I knew the solution from the beginning, and, researching it was just adding color to it. And I learned that, the more failures you can uncover with a product, or, the matching between the business goals and the user goals, the more opportunity there is to design something really useful and meaningful. And there's always room for improvement. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Oh, I have a good example. Speaking of anecdotes. So this was a few years ago, but it was really intense. I was working with a financial services company, and they had financial advisors who they had talked for almost a year with about kind of designing this client assessment system for their clients. And the business had this very specific idea that each financial advisor needed an iPad app to be able to assess their client, understand their what's the word for it? Their comfort level with risk. There's a word for that, but I can't think of what it is right now. And so this iPad app was supposed to be able to assess the client in the moment and give the financial advisor a bunch of information about which direction to take them. And, they had been selling it throughout the organization for a year. So you can imagine in a huge bank what that would look like, across, cities and states and the country. It was, training sales executives. And it was a really big kind of push to make this iPad app happen. So they brought us in to build the iPad app, and we thought, well, we need to do contextual inquiry to understand really what your customers need and make sure we're building it the right way. And we met with financial advisors. We met with people who were planning their retirement. And we learned throughout the process that financial advisors, they really pride themselves on customizing something for their clients. And they have long-term relationships and successful relationships with clients based on that customization. So giving them an iPad app that kind of turned that into a very process-oriented, one-size-fits-all thing, not only turned off the financial advisors, but it made the clients feel like they weren't being treated as individuals. And imagine millions of dollars had been put into this push. We had to communicate to the bank that you can spend millions more building this iPad and then iPad app and then communicating about it, rolling it out in different sales conventions across the country, or you can try a totally different solution. And it took us literally a month, to talk through why it wasn't a good idea for them to build this iPad app. And finally, they thanked us. And we didn't end up doing a project with them, but we saved them millions of dollars. So that, I guess, is a good example of a very extreme example of when those things don't align.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I think that's a great example. And I think that sometimes, like you said in the beginning of story, like that's part of the goal of research is to find, you don't want it to validate all of your assumptions. Or that's what you're kind of testing. You kind of want to prove yourself wrong sometimes. And that's what I tell students a lot in the usability testing part of the projects too. I don't want you to come back and have all of your user tests say like, worked great, it was awesome, looks great. The point is to uncover opportunities where you can improve.
Absolutely.
And doing the evaluative or the qualitative and quantitative research in the beginning to evaluate an idea can reveal a lot of whether your assumptions are at odds with the results too. So that's part of what is sometimes good. So sometimes I've had the experience of my assumption is already at odds with the stakeholder, and I'm doing research hoping that it will prove them wrong. Sometimes that's what they need. Other people need to see in order to understand, to move forward, is data to back up why you're pushing back on someone or on an idea.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so Matt has a question. What types of research techniques do you like to use? And are there any that seem to be more effective than others?
So broadly, ethnographic research, I'm a huge, huge fan of that, which if you're not already familiar with it, is going into someone's context, into their office or home, or wherever the environment where they would be using what you're designing and building, to observe them and understand the story around the use of whatever you're working on. I feel like that is the most powerful form of research, because it's, someone can tell you what they do and how they do it, but there are lots of famous quotes about how people lie all the time when they're reporting on their experience. But when you're observing them in their environment, they tend to do something completely differently than they think they do. The context of their whole environment informs the way they use something too. So I just think every time that is powerful. But if you're asking more specifically about methodologies, I can talk about that too. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely does. And yeah, I'm familiar with the ethnographic research and everything. But I guess with that, are there any, suggestions on making it, more like as natural as possible too? Because you're still there and you're observing them and they know that you're observing them, or I guess is if you're there and they know that you're there, making it as natural as you possibly can.
Yeah. Some people would argue against this, but I'm a big fan of being very involved in planning the research and building a relationship in some way with people before you're observing them. So that doesn't mean that you're making them so comfortable that, you're friends and they're just wanting to say things that please you. There's a fine line there too. But for instance, I always really like to be involved from the communication that goes to the people that I'm going to be interviewing with from the very beginning. So for instance, scheduling the time with them and telling them where I'm from and what I'm focused on learning, to make them more comfortable in not being a research subject, but a human. And this is a human exchange that we're having. And that I'm respectful of their schedule and their needs as well. I think that just the planning, being very thoughtful about the planning process and scheduling process of an interview can go a long way when it comes to making people comfortable. And then in the moment, when you're in the room, some people say, don't put a screen between you. Don't have your laptop facing them while you're taking notes. Sometimes I kind of feel that out and I see if I can even do something simple like turn my computer screen where I'm taking notes so I'm like sitting next to them and they can see my screen. Little things like that can make someone feel more comfortable, or just using a notepad and taking down notes. And just letting them know as much about the process as you can from the very beginning. So, we're going to spend an hour together and I'm going to ask you a few questions, and, there are no right or wrong answers. Preparing all that preamble stuff before you go into an interview, and then making sure you get that in before you start the interview, can be really helpful in making you more comfortable too.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
I kind of had a follow-up question on that. What sample size do you need for ethnographic research in order so that you're not like biasing your research to, I definitely want to, make this work for Jenny in that specific situation? I remember.
The sample size within qualitative research is much less important than it is in quantitative research from my perspective. I think you can find some really powerful, and I wish I could think of the resource. It might actually be Nielsen and Norman who recommends 5 people minimum for quantitative research, because you're going to find the biggest themes, the most important themes from those 5 people. Beyond that, and I think the threshold is like, it's really bad that I can't remember that right now, but I think the threshold is 7. Beyond 7, you start to get nuances of those same themes. And then after that, you're getting sort of diminishing returns when it comes to qualitative research. Does that make sense? So you can get really powerful insights from as little as 5 people. And I think it's 7 is the threshold.
Awesome. Thanks.
I wish I could look that up right now. For sure. I'm pretty sure it's Nielsen and Norman. Do you know, Emily?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I was thinking between 5 and 8.
8. Okay.
But yeah, that's spot on. The more that you can get, more people you can get to take your survey, the better. But
yep.
I think, between 5 and 8 is great for qualitative, and it also is such a time intensive and resource intensive experience too, that it's really hard to get. It takes a long time to commit the resources to do more than that amount too.
Yeah, it's a lot of information to synthesize too.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. We have a couple more minutes. What do you think? What do you think is going to change about the UX field over the next couple of years? Like, where do you see it going?
I see it becoming a more inclusive space. I think UX design has been sort of it's been focused on sort of I don't want this to come across badly, so I'm trying to figure out how to word it. It's been focused on a set of very privileged issues and problems, and solving those problems. I think there are lots of people who are working on solving a broad range of problems outside of some of the more common design problems that you see. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So I don't mean that to come across as bad. I'm not sure privilege was the right word to use, but I just see it becoming more inclusive in solving all different kinds of problems, all across all different types of socioeconomic settings, cultural settings. I think people are thinking more about the different kinds of problems that they can solve with design. I see it going to be broader and more inclusive.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think you're right. That in general, people are usually designing for someone who is able-bodied, educated, upper middle class, white. So broadening outside of those norms, I totally agree. I think that that's where it's headed. I went to the an Event Apart conference last year, and it seemed like accessibility was woven into every talk in a way that it hadn't been in, previous years or previous ways that people would talk about accessibility. It's like something you remember to do at the end, or maybe not remember at all. But I think it's becoming more mainstream as or more integrated into the design process rather than a separate focus, which I think is a good thing too.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a huge change.
Yeah. Cool. Are there any other questions from any of the students?
Awesome.
Time goes by so fast.
I know, time flies with interesting conversation. I think Anna wanted to know the book that you cited quickly. I just saw that.
Oh, I was referring to Nielsen Norman. So they are they are the folks who came up with the heuristic analysis that is part of Springboard. So they have a website and a blog, and I think they still do research projects as well. But I'm pretty sure there are articles, and I can go back if there's somehow I can let you know the resource to look for that threshold number that we were talking about. Is that what you're referring to, Anna? Okay. Yeah, I wonder if there's a way I can share that. I can add it to the community, maybe? Is that the best way?
That would be great if you posted and shared resources in the community.
Okay.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Angela. It was great to have you on here and to hear your thoughts and really interesting.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to everyone who will watch this recording. And have a great rest of the week, everyone. Thanks, Emily, for being the host as always.
Sure.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, no problem. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks. See you guys.
See you all soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.